All right. Hi, everyone. It seems like we are live. Hello, good morning, or probably good afternoon for a lot of you joining us today. So today's webinar is FTC's latest video game enforcement from compliance to competitive advantage. My name is Sarah Perocha, and I work at Keyword Studio in the player engagement team. First of all, thank you for joining us. I know everyone has a very busy schedule those days. And this is actually the first session of our webinar series, which is all about player engagement. And we are very pleased to welcome our partner, KID, to join us for our first session. Thank you, Joe, for joining us. And we will be inviting a lot more industry leaders in the coming weeks and months to join us. And the session are really designed to help game studios to master player engagement and retention, and gain expert insights and actionable strategies to optimize player support, trust and safety, VIP and growth, D2C strategies, community engagement, and much more. So before we start, I'd like to cover some of the boring housekeeping items while we're waiting for everyone to join us. We will have questions at the end of the session, so there's a Q&A box at the bottom. Feel free to start asking your question and we'll take them at the end of the session. If you have any technical issues, you can try to refresh your browser or contact me directly and I'll try to help you. And then last, it's recorded and we'll be sending the recording straight away later today. So we've been working with Peter Gearson, Head of Player Engagement Solutions at Keyword Studio, and Joe Newman, Senior Legal Counsel at KID, to prepare the content of today's session, which we hope you will find insightful. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Peter to kick things off.
Welcome, everybody, and hope we're going to talk about what seems to be quite an interesting and urgent topic, but it also could be quite dark, and hopefully we can bring some light and some understanding to what can otherwise be sort of a difficult area to navigate. And I'm really pleased that I've got Joe on from KID to help with that whole process, because it's always great to have expertise. And what we're finding in the player engagement space, anything to do around trust and safety and setting up the platforms, the spillover into player support in the communities, is this worry or concern about like what is, what isn't, should be done. It was always nice to have some things and to do some of the basics, but now it's like, are the concerns of what should we really be doing? So we really want to talk about how, spending some time and focusing in this area can actually give you a competitive advantage. And also, I think, address some of the concerns and bring you up to speed on some of the trends or some of the issues that have happened. And I think a great way to look at this is to then look at what is this new paradigm in trust and safety in gaming about, which is what the sort of next title slide talks about. And Joe and I have been going backwards and forwards and folks in the space around trust and safety have been talking about this for a while at a lot of conferences. You're seeing a lot more of them recently. So Joe, if I jump across to the next slide, I think if that's going on past this one of the paradigm,
Yep.
I think we can talk about sort of what we really want to be talking about, which is sort of the growing scrutiny, or sort of the big brother that's watching us, who's out there, who's watching us, who's wanting us to behave and do all of these new compliant things and come in line. And that's a lot of regulatory compliance that's going on from various global bodies. There's a lot of work in the EU. There's a lot of work with countries within the EU, across the states in acts like COPPA and stuff that are coming in. But also, and we shouldn't forget this, there's a lot more knowledge and a lot more understanding within player communities and players expecting things to change. They also want to be safe. They don't want to find themselves in a situation where things are not safe for them, or it's unsure, or is their money or participating in a game is okay to do so. And so for us, the strategic imperative that we want to talk about is like, how do you balance this act? Can you overdo this? Can you overstep? Is it really, in there being a big police, big brothers watching you and making the players feel completely overwhelmed with things, or doing absolutely nothing and then waiting? So, don't worry, when the fine comes, we'll pay it and we'll survive. You've got to find this middle ground, this way to utilize the setup to be ahead of the competitors and to look at how you can make this work for yourself. So the key here is the strategic imperative of what do we need to do in innovating with the systems that are available to us, and understanding the environment, really understanding the environment and being a sort of a thought leader in the space. It's what we really want to try and the message we would bring across today. Look at the next slide, Joe. And so I think this is where it's a great segue to bring in someone who's far more knowledgeable than me and can sort of guide us in the thinking around this regulatory landscape and what to look out for. I think you've got more insight here than I do, Joe.
All right. Thanks, Peter. And thanks again for having me. Again, my name is Joe Newman. I'm a senior legal counsel at KID. By short background, I've been dealing with kids issues and consumer protection issues and privacy in the video game industry for over a decade. I worked at EA, I worked at Ubisoft, I worked in private practice counseling the big tech companies down to the little indies and everywhere in between. So this is a topic that is very much the focal point of my career. So I'm very thrilled to be talking about it. So, well, what I'm going to do, when a big FTC enforcement hits, there are a bunch of questions. What's going on? Setting the stage. What actually happened? What does it mean? And then what do I need to do? So those are the sort of things that I'm hoping to answer, or at least start that conversation. I'm sure there'll be a good Q&A. But first, I want to set the stage. So what's the regulatory landscape that we're looking at? When I started working in kids' privacy and protection a decade ago, it was actually pretty simple. It was just, oh, okay, well, there's COPPA in the US, and if somebody's under 13, you just don't collect data from them. That is no longer the case. It is much more complicated. In fact, only 30% of the world actually defines the digital age of consent at 13. The rest of the world is way more complicated and diverse. And many, to Peter's point, many regulators who are making that balancing act of how, what age do we want to protect kids at? How strict do we want to be? Where do we need parents' consent? Countries around the world are coming to different conclusions as to how to protect children. The old joke is everybody knows that you need to protect children, but nobody agrees on how. And in fact, nobody even agrees on what a child is. Here's just a quick map showing the digital age of consent around the world. It's all over the place. You've got 13, 15, 16, 18, 21. There's some sort of regional consistency, but even so, it's changing a lot. And we expect this map to continue to change. It's just one illustration, right? This is just how we define a child. The complexity around the legal landscape right now for anybody who's in the video game or kids space is just very, very complicated, and that's why we're here, and that's what KID is designed to help people manage. So again, that's a little bit of table setting. I think let's just dive right into this Genshin Impact HoYoverse enforcement, because that's the title of the webinar. That's why you guys are here. So let's start with the facts. Let's start with what actually happened. There was an investigation into HoYoverse. That means, for those unfamiliar with FTC process, that a investigation was conducted, which can take a number of years. A formal complaint is filed, and then what tends to happen, and what happened here, is that complaint leads to a settlement. That settlement is something that's negotiated between the FTC and the company that gets investigated, and it results in some key outcomes. This is the outcome of that settlement. So there was a $20 million fine, which is a significant fine. It's not as much as some previous fines, but for reasons that I'll discuss in a bit. A 10-year compliance monitoring requirement, which means that for the next 10 years, HoYoverse will be required to report into the FTC, and they will be sort of under their eye, which is a pretty significant compliance burden. And if they break their consent order, you can see that there's sometimes escalations, as we saw with the TikTok escalation to the DOJ. They have to delete all existing accounts for people under 13. And then over here, you see that new accounts under 13 are going to require parental consent. The big one, and the one that made a bunch of the headlines, is that for any player under 16, you need to get parental consent for loot boxes. And in fact, even that is actually a little bit inaccurate, because if you read the order, it's actually all purchases will require a parent if under 16. Now, obviously, that is a specific penalty that was negotiated between HoYoverse and the FTC. So that leads to a question of, what does that actually mean? What precedential value does it have for the rest of the industry? So those are the facts. Now let's talk a little bit about why this happened and what did they do wrong that got them in trouble. So the first thing was COPPA. And as we've seen, and we'll discuss this in a second, there's a long line of COPPA enforcements in the video game in the video game industry. COPPA is, for those who don't know, it's the Children's Online Privacy and Protection Act. Very simply, it says if your online product or service is appealing to children, you're child-directed, to use the legal term, you need to get verifiable parental consent before collecting any personal information from someone under 13. Spoilers, the FTC claims that the Genshin Impact game was child-directed. There were no structures or processes in place to get parental consent for kids, no age gate, nothing like that. And so that was kind of the first count. The second two counts are a little bit novel. And again, I taking a step back, want to explain a little bit what the FTC does. So they have authority to both enforce COPPA, that's one of their regulatory mandates, but they also have a general authority under what's called Section 5 of the FTC Act to go after things that they consider to be, quote, unfair or deceptive acts or practices in commerce. So essentially, they have this broad authority to say, we don't think this is fair, we think this is harming consumers, and we want you to stop. So two of the things that the FTC alleged that HoYoverse was doing wrong had to do with their use of loot boxes. So there was a bunch of deceptive alleged activity around misleading people about to what the true odds were, how likely it was to get the items that you wanted out of loot boxes. And then specifically, there's a lot of discussion in the complaint about the use of multiple different tiers of currency, which the FTC alleged was an attempt to obscure the true cost of in-game items and loot boxes. So we'll unpack this a little bit, but I do want to focus specifically on this first point about COPPA, because again, I've been looking at FTC enforcements for actually now quite a while, and there is a very, very clear pattern that is emerging. So here's a graphic that I think kind of helps showing actually a decade of COPPA enforcement. We have back in 2014, TinyCo. And I won't go too deep into this slide. We can, distribute this later. But you can see at the beginning, COPPA enforcement was pretty obvious as to this was a child-directed game. This is a game about building a zoo, raising adorable animals. No one could credibly say that this wasn't appealing to kids, right? So this is an easy case. You're going to see each case get slightly harder when we're talking about what is a child-directed experience. The next one was in 2019. It was against TikTok. The FTC here, I mean, I use TikTok. My wife uses TikTok. A lot of people use TikTok. This is not an app that is primarily appealing to children. However, it was considered a mixed audience app, which means that it was primarily for adults, but there were a whole lot of kids. And when making the argument in the complaint that TikTok was a child-directed experience, there was lots of evidence of, songs appealing to children, a significant percentage of underage users, thousands of parental complaints, privacy, safety concerns. Again, what you're going to see here is that the FTC's motivation in bringing enforcements is really, it's simple. They want to protect kids. And where they see that kids are getting hurt or in trouble, they will make the case that that is a child-directed experience in order to sort of assert jurisdiction. So in 2022, it moved a little bit further to Fortnite, which was a little bit of a surprise because Fortnite had taken the position that this is a shooter game. It's rated T for T. I mean, it's about getting sniper rifles and last man standing. Epic had taken the position that this isn't a kid's game, and the FTC disagreed. In the complaint, they talk about this gameplay focus on building forts. They made a big deal about promotional tie-ins and advertising. Epic Games, the creator of Fortnite, had done a lot of Halloween costumes for kids featuring Fortnite characters and Nerf guns and things like that. So they said, you might think that this is a game for adults or teenagers, but actually we consider it child directed. And again, there were thousands of complaints. A significant percentage of Fortnite's users were actually, in that underage 10 to 12 range. And then, won't get too much into that complaint, but there was also a little bit of an expansion in the Fortnite case to say, not only are we going after you for COPPA violations, but also for things that we think are unfair and deceptive. So using that Section 5 authority to say, hey, the way that you're marketing your in-game purchases is unfair. I bring that up because it comes up again here in Genshin. Genshin is the hardest of these four cases because unlike TinyCo, TikTok, and Fortnite, there actually weren't a significant number of underage players playing Genshin. They were a very small portion of the overall user base. And like Fortnite, this was another T for teen game that's fantasy role-playing, too complicated probably for most young players to enjoy. And there weren't even a whole lot of substantial parent complaints. So you might ask yourself, oh, what's going on? Is there an expansion here? And I think there is. I think the FTC is very clearly saying we take a broad view of what is child-directed. Where there are kids, there are likely to be, a child-directed experience. And again, to focus just what did they specifically say in the complaint? They highlighted the cute characters and advertising that, included these sort of chibi anime characters. This was part of how the FTC made its assessment that Genshin Impact was a child-directed game. So now that we know kind of what happened and why it happened, the next question is, what do we do about it, and what comes next? And I think I'll not spend too much time here because I do think we'll have a lively discussion in the Q&A. But there's a lot of ambiguity, actually, as to what this means today. Because, again, whenever there's an FTC enforcement, there are multiple sort of sources of authority for what is actually happening. If you look at, for example, the blogs, there's a whole bunch of stuff about prohibiting children under 16 to purchase loot boxes without parental consent. But if you look at the complaint, this is what the FTC alleged that they had done wrong. It talks about how loot boxes were being sold to children and teenagers. And these acts or practices are likely to cause injury, and this is a violation of Section 5. So if you look at the complaint, it's actually broader. Anyone under 18 shouldn't be able to get loot boxes. Of course, that's not the law, but that is what they were kind of going for. And then again, there's more ambiguity because the actual commissioners themselves seem to disagree as to what the precedent is. There was dissents as to this count 5. You have, on the one hand, Commissioner Ferguson, who's now the chair of the FTC under the Trump administration, saying this is new law. We don't want to say that loot boxes are per se going to be unfair. Of course, none of this should mean that I favor them, but we just haven't made the case yet that the loot boxes are per se unfair. So, pumping the brakes on this. And then even within the FTC, you have the concurring statement of Commissioner Slaughter, who goes the full other direction, says, I think that these are a scourge, the growing scourge of so-called loot boxes in video games. So she's absolutely taking a hardline position that you cannot sell loot boxes to kids. So there is ambiguity here. Is it that all loot boxes are not okay? Is it that all loot boxes require VPC, parental consent, if you're under 16? If you want to follow the order or the settlement, that would be kind of the takeaway. Or maybe loot boxes are actually still kind of okay as long as they're not unfair or don't use, deceptive currencies. Is it possible to make loot boxes in a way that is kid friendly? It's something we can talk about. I'm a little skeptical, but that is at least something that is left open for discussion in wake of this settlement. So anyway, I've spoken for a bunch, and we'll try and get into the practical what you can do. But the one takeaway that I think is clear from here is that getting the parent involved seems to be a good way to mitigate risk. It is what the FTC ultimately required of HoYoverse and HoYoverse and Genshin Impact as a result of this settlement. It seems to me to be something that they think cures the risk. And again, under this new administration and with Commissioner Ferguson, there's a lot of emphasis placed on parental controls and giving controls back to the parents to manage their kids' experience. So that does seem to be a trend and a thing that we're seeing come out of this case, particularly in the COPPA context. So again, just to close, how does one address parental concerns in this environment? Oftentimes, and what we hear from parents is that parents feel overwhelmed by the complexity of managing their children's gaming experiences. So, there is this regulatory shift towards giving parents more control, and that also includes other safety features like content moderation, design, privacy by default, things like that. Let's dig into that just a little bit more in terms of the operational impact of how do you handle this space? How do you do both loot boxes and then just create age-appropriate experiences? So I'll pass it back to Peter. Oh, you're on mute, Peter.
Typical. It's always on between Zoom and stuff, and you press the button in the wrong direction. Thanks, Joe. I was just saying, amazing. Listening and learning. I know I've listened to this with you before, but still learn every time. So I appreciate that. And I think that's the right thing. If you move on to the next slide, what we really can see is the key really is how do you set yourselves up for success? Everything is about what can you do to set up for success, and preparing support systems for compliance takes a little bit of thought, a little bit of planning, thinking strategically, thinking a little bit more, what are we trying to achieve? What outcomes do we need to get to? And I really think it comes down to sort of what we would say, integrating safety by design. You're being a bit strategic in what it is you're doing. It's not just putting in a system and maybe throwing some bodies at it, and then you're kind of complying and you're keeping the FTC happy, tick box, let's move on. We're well beyond that. You really need to think about why we're doing this. And ethical design as a foundation, I think, is underpinning a long-term result for strategy. You can actually do better in your game if you're bringing safety by design into it, and embedding some of those trust and safety principles into the game development sort of from the outset. Examples like, transparent monetization of the mechanics to avoid any kind of deceptive processes. To your point around like what is or isn't permitted. So I think these are the key areas to focus on. Is the proactive communication, educating players on the changes, policies, or features you may be bringing, why it's to their benefit, how to engage them in the community and have them be champions of this idea and have them help spread the word across the community. Definitely we live in the times of AI. AI is just the buzzword. Wherever you go, it's AI. But the AI automation and detailed help articles specifically around this are very, very helpful in doing what can quickly make it much easier for people to find out what's going on, and for agents, moderators alike, as well as players, resolving the common recurring issues or principles around this. Real-time dashboards back to management. You can't report on things 2 or 3 days later, then wait a day, then try and do some QA or behind-the-scenes fix. These issues, especially things like real-life threats, but also just your day-to-day moderators, have to happen far more quickly. There's an expectation from players and an expectation from the community that things are dealt with efficiently and dealt with well. So you really need real-time dashboards to be able to manage and track things. And then a ton of training. We often forget that everything goes hand in hand with the human piece. AI hasn't replaced us, thankfully, yet everywhere. It is unlikely to do so for quite some time, no matter what the AI pundits are saying. And as a result, you really need to invest in the training of the people that are going to be managing or reacting or interacting with the community. That training is really critical so that you're not misinforming people and setting yourselves up for failure. We'll pop onto that next slide. So if you're future-proofing your game through trust and safety, you know, what are the kinds of things you should be looking at, and what is the thinking behind that? And I think that in line with what you've been talking about and the lessons learned in the case, if we move to our next slide, we have sort of three key overriding thoughts in that, and we'll see this, or I'll go into this a little bit more detail in the next slide or two, but just not trying to stay too focused on one area. The three key areas you really want to address is how foundational is your structure in terms of built from the ground up with benchmarked and the process. Proactively addressing compliance, not reactively, not after the fact. You know, there was a famous saying of, you know, closing the stable door after the horse has bolted is no good. You know, you've got a fine, you're already on the radar, they're going to expect you to report for 10 years. Would have been far better if things had been done up front and not reactively. So how can you proactively address the compliance and the player experience in this while maintaining that operational efficiency? And then again, I spoke about the ethical design. And so we really want to be talking about looking at things like implementing robust monitoring systems, enhancing the data privacy and the security issues around your game, and being, you know, taking on what is the right responsibility in building those systems. Comprehensive training, I've really stuck on that one. Really put the training in with your folk, your agents, your moderators, all people involved. Develop a clear communication channel. The key here is communicating transparently to all. This is why this exists. This is why it's there. And this is what it's going to do. And then that should solve a ton of problems. Collaborate. And Joe, your point about the FTC and them wanting to protect the kids, they're trying to do good. And all regulatory bodies are trying to do good. So collaborate with the regulatory bodies and the NGOs. Really actually be proactive in the community and being one of the thought leaders by reaching out and understanding, going to these conferences, looking at what's going on, and collaborate with folks to understand your environment, and then regularly update those policies and procedures. If things move, it changes. It's regularly going to undergo changes. You can't work with what you had from the website, as you say, 5 years ago. If you look at the short thing you did over the 10 years, what was the 300K fine for the original COPPA offense dramatically morphed into what was now the Genshin issue, which was quite a difficult one, as you said, and a lot more complex. So those are the key things around these 3 points. If we look at the next slide. This is how we look at it. When we approach and work with anybody that is looking to understand the system, we're designing from the ground up in safety by embedding trust and safety into the game design. We talk about the infinity loop of player happiness. You're building a game for the players, for the community. You want them happy, you want them engaged, you want them playing the game. A successful game requires a happy, successful, and engaged community. So all the parts that touch that, the AI and the automation for your reporting, innovation, the data analytics, the insight, your player support, your community engagement, your quality of service, VIP type support, any strategy and insight, social marketing, trailers, etc., all should come from an underlying that what we call a trust and safety envelope. Build out from the ground up a safe, caring, well-documented, well-communicated policy of how you will manage to be compliant depending on the type of game or which community you're going for, what's expected, what type of behavior, entrench that positive behavior, build that trust and safety envelope, and all the other moving parts should integrate and touch on that. Then you shouldn't overtread the mark. You're putting, if you're an environment that is trying to drive kid engagement, you shouldn't be putting trailers out there that are perhaps 18 plus. It ties in. So if you build the framework and the structure correctly, everything else ties in, and all the touch points tie in if you're designing for safety. Let's pop onto the next page, please. So integrated safety by design means that you're going to touch on these points. And I won't go to them because we already sort of have, through what you've said, Joe, and what I've been talking about, is be transparent in terms of your monetization, or what's age appropriate and what does that mean in different parts of the world, and how do you protect that younger audience using AI to benefit the proactive harm prevention, because it really does an amazing job, and you should build it into your things. Real life threat is very, very much something we want to talk to almost everyone about. It really needs to be put into it, and your reporting. All of these tie back into that design. But what is the benefit of doing this? So, we talk about a competitive advantage, and I'll touch on a few of these points now before we maybe drill in a little later, or when we get to some of the questions and answers. But if you're going to spend some time and money doing this kind of thing, you're going to get enhanced player trust and loyalty. If you're doing this correctly, you're going to get some enhanced trust. Using it as a competitive advantage, you want to see that player trust and loyalty. To your point, Joe, reduced legal and financial risks. Doing this properly means you've got far less likely to get some kind of action brought to you by the FTC. The improved player experience. If players are happy, if they're engaged, if they trust the environment, they will be ambassadors and bring other players to the game, and they will feel safer. Positive brand image. You're seen as one of the leading lights, so a positive brand image drives the popularity of the brand and the game. Higher player retention and engagement. And just on that note, high player retention and engagement leads to massive differences. If you look at day 1, day 7, and day 30 retention numbers, those games that have invested in this area, Niantic's a great example with the Pokemon Go setup, and the effort they've been putting into their trust and safety recently in terms of that case, is something where I think we've got a player safety page that people can link to. And I won't go into the details of the case now. Oh, there we go. It really is an environment where they actually put this information out there with the guidelines, how it's going. They give a report back. They really are sharing this information. This is a talk about proactive and making a competitive advantage. They have to do this anyway. They do need to protect the environment anyway. This is what they then talk about in terms of what technology we're using, how we're doing this, how the policy developed. It's all available to take a look at. It's really worth the read. But day 1, day 7, and day 30 retention, if you have a day 1 retention of around 40%, day 7, 20, and day 30, 10, if you have enhanced trust and safety environments, some games have achieved day 1 retentions 50% and higher. So you can get a 10 to 12% swing in your favor. Down the line, that 10% that ends up being at day 30 after day 1, that 10 or 12% is now literally 4 or 5% higher. It's dramatic in the success of the game. So that's where I think a massive competitive advantage it can come through. And the impact of safety on engagement, as you can see, is just prioritizing that trust and driving that reputational trust with the community and the players. I think there's a slide that follows this that does talk a little bit more about that.
Can I just add to that,
Yeah.
Peter? Because we were talking slightly before the webinar started, because I think you raised a great point, which is like, so we are in a very difficult environment for the games industry as a whole. In this year with the economy being the way it is, the industry changing, and as you mentioned before we started, like consumers are getting a little bit more risk averse. And they don't want to, spend as much money on their games. They want to be more choosy and picky. Again, I think there's Niantic and Nintendo is such a great example because they are trusted and they are weathering the storm pretty darn well. Nintendo and the Switch 2, that is an extremely sought after and exciting thing, and parents are on board because Nintendo has made that trust and safety part of their image in a really powerful and important way. And yeah, it does pay dividends, right? I saw there was a question about how do you measure success? I mean, that brand image does translate to higher retention, higher higher numbers. Anyway, I just thought I'd just interject that because I like that point.
So before I jump into the takeaways, and just to add to your point, Joan, thank you for raising it, because that's exactly why Nintendo spend the money. I think it's Ego asked how you measure success. If you've implemented something and it's now there, it's hard to then take it away and then see, what the difference is, because it's A/B testing. It's great if you can A/B test. But one of the ways you can is if you're bringing this process in and you've got new games launching, but you have existing games that maybe not are quite there. I think you could benchmark and you could see quite clearly. It's something to take offline and go into detail, because depending on the environment, where you are in the world, what type of game, what genre, who the gaming community is, there's quite a difference in what trust and safety means to each of those communities. And so this is one of those really harder ROI cases. But there are definitely case studies we can share, depending on like what it is your viewpoint is. So maybe you want to just ping us and we can share some information there where you can see the difference before and after. But actually, there are definitely KPIs to put in place. And again, we don't really have the time to go into that here, but definitely maybe that's a follow-up, Sarah, that we can actually post the webinar into an article where we can actually drill into how you measure the results of trust and safety. That would be very interesting. There's definitely ways we can share on that. And then I don't know if you saw there are a couple of other questions coming through, which we'll get to. But just wrapping up my thoughts. If you're future proofing, you really need to invest in scalable trust and safety solutions. And there's some diligence that needs to be done there. There's some really, really good players in the market for each of the spaces, and happy to share those thoughts. But the second point as well is to implement the verifiable parental controls. Your parents want this to be an easy experience for them to be able to look, and how do they look after the kids and know that they can, and not have to worry too much about being techno savvy. And so those are the two areas you really want to be focusing on, and that is adopting AI-driven solutions that can make this integrated into your environment, into your community, into your game. So preparing the support systems for the compliance workloads. Again, that's a process, where you would need a partner to help if you don't know how to do it yourself, or you bring on some in-house expertise. It does take a learning curve, some knowledge base, and the training we spoke about. But the key one out of all of these is, like anything, you have to foster it in the culture. The culture has to become one of transparency and accountability, taking this on and accepting that if we take it on correctly, it can be a competitive advantage, but also to be seen as a thought leader for the brand and for the players. We take this seriously. It can't just be a word salad, or, yeah, we take trust and safety seriously, but the culture itself makes the other things quite easy. I think, Joe, you have some final points or thoughts on that, but I just want to say, if they foster a culture.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, next slide. No, I just wanted to end again by just mother of all learning is repetition. If you're not fostering that culture through the organization, I think you're going to be losing no matter what else you implement.
Yep, absolutely. So, and then, turning back to Genshin specifically, and what do we do, and how do we solve for it? There are a bunch of ways that, I've been doing, roundtable discussions and panelists and things in the wake of the enforcement. There's a lot of discussion about what do we do? Do we try to design our loot boxes in a way that is kid friendly? Again, I will admit that I'm a bit skeptical here. As I tried as a sort of thought experiment. I have a 5-year-old daughter. I tried to explain to her the concept of a loot box. It was not easy. Obviously, she's 5. She's not, 10. But it took about a half an hour, and when she was done, I was like, "Do you want to buy one?" She's like, "No." So, there's a tricky bit there in terms of building a loot box program that, again, when you're looking at, Commissioner Slaughter, who says these are a scourge, she's going to be hard to convince. Again, she's, we'll see where the majority goes, but if you have kids spending hundreds of dollars in your game on loot boxes, it's going to be a little hard to show that you did everything right in terms of displaying odds and again, I think the only real meaningful risk mitigation strategy if you have a child-directed game is to involve the parent. And again, what KID does, for those who are not familiar, our company was actually founded by lawyers, and our CEO is a big law lawyer. I came from the legal industry, and we had the feedback from our clients, which is, man, this kid stuff, it's like we all want to protect kids, but it's expensive, it's complicated. Going back, if you saw the map of the world, like if we were going to comply with all the world's laws, gosh, just the legal fees of researching what the laws are would be, cost prohibitive. And so, why isn't there just, technological tools, APIs that can just solve this? So that's what we set out to do. So at a very high level, and we don't have to get into a full demo, but what KID does is it's APIs that are integrated into the game. You give us the age and the jurisdiction of your player, your user. We have this giant database of all the world's laws that we keep up to date, and we will tell you, for 200 plus jurisdictions and sub-jurisdictions, what the actual age-appropriate experience looks like based off of the laws, the regulatory guidance, best practices, etc. And you then implement that depending on your compliance strategy. And that's how you do actually provide a different experience for, say, a 12-year-old in Kansas versus a 16-year-old in the UK, etc. That personalization, that dynamic experience, we think that that is the way of the future. And then when it comes to getting parental consent, our platform is designed to do that in a streamlined and scalable way. So if you are that 12-year-old in Kansas and you need to get the parent involved, the parent is shown a very, quick, I guess if we have time, we can do a demo. I'm going to skip it for now because I see we have questions. But the parent can consent to all this stuff. And if they want to revoke the consent, they can. It just affects what the API delivers. So the idea here is to take a lot of the work off of the individual game teams to have to manage all of this stuff, and the legal departments as well to have to research what the laws are in all these different countries. So yeah, let's switch it over to the Q&A because I did see a number of questions, and there always seems to be a good, healthy conversation with this too.
I just wanted to say that probably the quickest way, because I did say it a few times in when you talk about trust and safety and player, but in coming back around, like, how do you know trust and safety compliance is good or helping you? You could see it like in the before, as I said, before and after. If you are measuring your retention numbers, your bannings in terms of if there's toxicity in the game and the bannings go down, things like transparency around loot boxes, which we spoke about a number of times. If your sales go up and there's less issues or less returns or less discrepancies in terms of customer support queries against, I bought this but I didn't understand it, etc. All of these kinds of metrics are going to be an indicator that the compliance system is working and giving you a return. And that, as I said, quite easy to implement these KPIs. So hopefully that does give that. But let's jump over if there's if there's some other questions we can address. That would be quite good.
Yes, there was one with the FTC broadening out the definition of child-directed. Are we being pushed into age gating?
So let's unpack that a little bit because there's sometimes some confusion about what it means to do age gating. So under COPPA, which is again the law that the FTC is using here, if your online product or service is considered child-directed but a mixed audience, so children are not the primary audience, but they do have a significant amount of them and likely to appeal to them, then the COPPA rule allows you to employ an age screen, which allows the user to input their age and get an age-appropriate experience. So if they're under 13, maybe you just turn everything off that requires parental consent, or increasingly you see companies who are using KID actually get that parental consent, which would unlock those features essentially. There is a little bit of sometimes confusion when talking about this because under COPPA, the only thing that's required is that it is a neutral age screen. You're essentially allowing self-declaration. So if a kid decides to lie about their age and say, I'm 18 years old, under COPPA, you're allowed to do that. Obviously, there are lots of people and regulators around the world who have noted that kids really often lie about their age, and they are trying to pass additional legislation to make it harder to lie about your age through age assurance or age verification. But again, within the US, that's actually kind of constitutionally shaky. There's a Supreme Court case they heard last month, actually, Free Speech Coalition versus Paxton, challenging the idea of mandatory age verification. From our perspective, I mean, we do have age assurance and verification solutions that we can employ. But I want to make it very clear that the Genshin Impact case was not about age verification. It was about Genshin had no age screen, had no way. They didn't ask, who their players were and what their ages were. So had they put even just the neutral, hey, how old are you? And then even shut things off, or even if they didn't get parental consent, we would have seen this case go a different way. So again, I don't want to derail by getting into the sort of constitutional and free speech implications of mandatory age verification. This is something that's a little bit more straightforward, fortunately.
Thank you, Joe. We had another question come in. How do you address player frustration when enforcing age verification or other restrictions?
Yeah, this is kind of related to the last question, right? So
Yeah.
players don't really want to verify their age. There's privacy and safety concerns with doing that. Again, that's why for now, the FTC is just saying, a self-declared age gate is fine, at least for COPPA purposes. I will tell you that in my experience over the years of implementing age entry, or self-declared age screens, we get a lot of differing responses. Obviously, we see in the data that lots of kids say that they're one, lots of adults say that they're one, lots of kids say that they're 99, and so we get a wide range of responses. And so and then lots of people who are honest about their age too. And what tends to happen is people self-select. And there's a little bit of frustration initially because people don't necessarily understand the implications of if I enter that I'm 1 year old, that is actually going to change my game experience. So there is some frustration there, which is, again, to Peter's point, why you got to do some communication. But ultimately, eventually people understand that this is important and it's for legal compliance purposes, and that's why it's behooves them to be honest about their age.
And I think that it's like anything. If you think about when you queue for gas, when there's a gas shortage, or the price is going to go up tomorrow. You've seen the queue at the gas station because tomorrow suddenly the price is going up a couple of dollars a gallon or whatever. Then there's frustration while you're in the queue. But the reason people realize they're in the queue is I'm prepared to go through this frustration because I'm going to get the gas at X dollars cheaper. If I wait till tomorrow and there won't be a queue because no one's queuing for gas because everyone filled up and I didn't, I have the gas station to myself, but I pay more. It's the same kind of philosophy. And it comes down to the only way you get around that is that whole idea of using it as a competitive advantage, being very transparent, very open, be very communicative, and incorporate or add in your community. You're still going to get people who are going to be frustrated or upset by it. It's just human nature. But in the end, as Joe says, you find that most people then realize, okay, no, this does make sense, and it is the right thing to be doing. It's just a question of consistency with your clear and transparent message. So anyway around it, you can't do anything else. Are there any other questions, Sarah?
Yes, we actually had also a few coming in through registrations. So there was one which was about how specific do we need to be with items like card packs in our games? Do we need to have full percentage odds available in game? Don't know if one of you would like to take that one.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. So that has actually been required before the Genshin Impact case. Loot box disclosures, odds disclosures. Again, this is part of the whole Unfair and Deceptive Acts, Section 5. If you're not disclosing your odds, if your odds are misleading or incorrect, that's just a slam dunk easy, case for a regulator to bring. I should also mention too that although we're talking about the FTC as our regulatory body, most US states also have their own sort of state equivalent of Section 5, unfair and deceptive acts or practices. And those laws tend to have private rights of action. We have seen a lot of class action lawsuits brought by the plaintiffs' bar against video game companies for allegedly deceptive or unfair practices around loot boxes and kids. The FTC is not the only sort of cop on this beat. You also have private parties as well as state AGs. Again, we've got a lot of questions over the last month or two with this new administration. Do we even have to worry about compliance anymore? And is all of this going to go away because, of Trump? And I think what we have seen historically, since we've had a Trump term before, is whenever there is sort of a power vacuum at the federal level, the state AGs way step it up to fill that gap, and they get actually a lot more aggressive. And we've seen that. We did have already a COPPA-esque enforcement in California with Tilting Point Media and their SpongeBob game last year, I believe. So I would expect that to continue for sure. And again, to get back to this question, odds, misleading disclosures, lack of disclosures, those are just really kind of low-hanging fruit for a regulator or a class action lawyer to make a case out of. So we definitely want to err on this. If you're going to continue to have loot boxes, making sure that those disclosures are very, very clear and accurate.
And just to back you up, Joe, the EU is very similar with the EU's approach, and again, within of the countries and with the Consumer Protection Act across the EU and in the countries, again, also having those kind of rights embedded in those, besides just the actual legislation for what video games should be stepping up to in terms of the act. So it's not just a US-based thing, it's definitely global. I think APAC and those areas are starting to look at it now. They may be a bit behind, but they definitely are looking. And one of the questions that came here, which was quite interesting, is how can you support teams to prepare for an increase in compliance? And I did touch on this. Firstly, providing training, really providing the training so that you have knowledge within your team to confidently tackle when the community asks some of the tougher questions or gets a little frustrated. Spend the time to do some training. Look at who can become compliance champions within the team. That's usually how we do it. We look for how we can expand the knowledge base and put more information into the knowledge base, pick some champions. You have clear escalation paths, certainly for things like real life threats. You have to have very clear escalation paths. It's something we really take very seriously and put in place. And then in the other place of it is how you can take advantage of the modern technology. Joe just explained very, very succinctly exactly how you can save fortunes of time by tying into what KID offers you for a worldwide process and take some of the sweat out of having to be able to comply within your different regions, and how it can help you manage through APIs. You're in this region, someone logs in, it automatically recognizes where they are, and it puts the game appropriate information in front of them. But by the same token, you can tap into that with that same technology and give your agents the same kind of knowledge, access to the knowledge base of what's required, so that they're also knowing. And it's just the effort, and often it doesn't take as much money. It just takes time. It does take some time, but it certainly doesn't take as much money as people think it does to put those types of processes in place.
I'll just add one little pro tip from doing this. I agree 100% with what Peter said, but one thing that I discovered over the years, specifically when you're talking about compliance-related inquiries from children, this is where we learned kind of the hard way what messages work well in a support interaction with a child versus an adult. Again, this is just some practical knowledge there. It is not usually effective to tell a kid, we're doing this for your safety or for your privacy. They just want to play the game. But it is a lot more effective to say, look, this is the law. and we're complying with the law. And we had this happen a lot when I was in-house at EA, and we rolled out an age gate for Madden Mobile. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy around why are we doing this? I just want to play my game. But when you cite to a legal requirement, that's like, okay, all right, well, if I'm upset about it, maybe I call my congressman. But yeah.
Thank you. I think we probably have time just for one more, and if we didn't have time to answer your question, we'll make sure that we follow up one-on-one after the session, but let's just take one more. So how would you go about building a compliant loot box?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there are a couple of ways to go about it. There's no one size fits all. I also think that, again, if you're starting from scratch versus if you were trying to retrofit an existing, loot box monetization scheme, I might have different advice for you. There are obvious takeaways from the Genshin Impact case. You want to make sure that odds are clear, easily accessible, that they are simple enough to understand for even a younger audience. In terms of currency systems, simple again is better. Wanting to make sure that you can directly purchase any loot box with real money, and that you don't have to convert multiple tiers of currency in order to get it. Again, some of this stuff, if you read the complaint, it provides a bit of a template. But I do caution this a bit because although it is hypothetically possible to create a loot box system that all ages could understand, even a 5-year-old, you have to look back at Commissioner Slaughter's concurrence and the complaint itself that just says any promotion or sale of loot boxes to children or teenagers is per se unfair. Again, not everybody agreed with this count, but it was a unanimous complaint that was filed. I do remain skeptical that it can be done without parental consent. And again, what we're seeing is this really clear line of cases from the FTC saying if it's a video game and there are kids playing, it's probably going to be considered child-directed and subject to COPPA. And if your game has loot boxes, as part of that parental consent process, there should be something saying, hey, parent, know that this game has loot boxes and consent to it. So that is by far the easiest compared to re-engineering your entire loot box scheme to, make it, kid friendly. I think it is operationally a lot easier to get parental consent, which is not, by the way, that's kind of a new development. 10 years ago, it would have been cost prohibitive to get parental consent, but the technology has improved a lot and scalability has improved a lot. So that is now, in my opinion, more viable.
Awesome, thank you very much. I'm not sure if you can see my screen now, but I've shared the community clubhouse. Can you see it, Peter?
No, not yet. I think, yeah, now it's come up. Perfect. There we go. Great. Well, everyone who's jumped on, thanks very, very much for joining the webinar. We just want to end up saying that GDC is just around the corner. As co-sponsors, KID and Keywords and a couple of the others, you can see FastSpring, AWS, Odin, they're all at the bottom. We actually host for free on the Tuesday at GDC, the Community Clubhouse, where these and other very interesting topics are discussed in 2 panel streams for the day, 2 full panel streams. There's a nice little cocktail at the end. So come and join. You get access to GDC for the week through your pass. And it's something we always give back to the community on. It's not a place where anything is sold to you. It's thought leadership, it's sharing knowledge, and it's just getting to know the community better. No one else puts anything on for the community. So we really felt when we got together that something needs to be done for the community. If you are, or if you know anyone who's going or anyone in the community, just please share. We would love to see you there and meet face to face and talk about some interesting topics like what we spoke about today. So I just wanted to end on that note that this is something we continue to talk about and not just have this webinar and then it ends. And I think going forward, I mean, please keep reaching out. If the questions we didn't get to, we will get to. but we'll continue. And then those that thought this was interesting, we have got this on demand, so folks can listen. We appreciate you coming and giving your time to listen to this. We're really passionate about making this thing work for all of us to have safer, better, and more compliant communities. So thanks for that.
Absolutely. And then, again, just I'm easy to get in touch with, just Joe at k-id.com. Yeah, we will also be at GDC at the Clubhouse. We'll be doing all sorts of fun stuff. But this is obviously lots of conversations around this. But thanks again.
Thank you very much. Have a good day or have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. Thanks again.